Order the regular meeting of the Simsbury Zoning Commission for July 15th. We have we need alternates for Will and Jerry. So I'll appoint Ned for Will and you for Vaughn for Jerry Post. Looked at the minutes. Ed, you had a comment on the minutes?
Just one error in that it mentions that the call was read by Rob Pomeroy.
Instead of Ed. Yes.
There's a typo,
I found it too, and then I couldn't find it again. Where is it?
parameters.
Yeah.
And it says perimeters instead of parameters.
Yeah, it should be parameters. You know where the line reference is?
Well, if I could find my copy of the minutes.
I can find it.
You'll find it?
Yep.
All right, thanks, Leslie. All right, so with those changes, I move that we accept the minutes. Any other comments? All right.
It's line 45.
Line 45. Thank you. All right, Ed, would you like to read the call, please?
Legal notice, Town of Simsbury Zoning Commission regular meeting. The Zoning Commission of the Town of Simsbury will hold a public hearing at a regular meeting to be held on Monday, July 15th, 2013 at 7 p.m. in the main meeting room at Simsbury Town Offices, 933 Hot Meadow Street, Simsbury, Connecticut, on the following. Item 1, application 13-34 of Brian R. Smith of Robinson & Cole, LLP, agent for Mark Sullivan, petitioner for a 6-month moratorium on farm use pursuant to Article 7, Section B1 of the Simsbury zoning regulations and the keeping of horses in residential districts pursuant to Article 7, Section B6 to allow the Commission to consider potential restrictions and standards that would protect adjacent residential properties. Item 2, application 13-35 of Brian R. Smith of Robinson & Cole, LLP, agent for Mark Sullivan, petitioner, for amendments to Article 4, Section B, and Article 7, Section B, and Article 7, Section C of the Simsbury zoning regulations to address issues related to commercial horse stables as distinguished from horses maintained for personal enjoyment in residential zones. At this hearing, interested persons may appear and be heard, and written communication will be received. Edward J. Pavick, Secretary, dated this 26th day of June 2013 at Simsbury, Connecticut.
Thank you, Ed. And I appreciate everyone who came tonight. Certainly, topic must be of great interest to a lot of people. Just a couple of sort of housekeeping rules or procedural rules. Given that these two, there are two separate applications, we're going to hold two separate public hearings. We'll open the first public hearing. We will hear a presentation by the applicant. We will then open the floor for discussion as it pertains to the first application, which is the 6-month moratorium in particular, but there are aspects of these that certainly cross over from one to the other. Then we will, the commission will make a decision as to whether to close that public hearing or leave it open. Then we will do the same for the second application. We'll open the public hearing. We'll have a presentation as it relates to the revised regulations that have been proposed. We will then open the floor to public comment, and again, then the commission will decide how to respond to the hearing. I would ask that everyone who wants to speak, maybe we could do a sign-up sheet. If that would be good. I would also appreciate, we'd like to give everybody the opportunity to speak. However, if what the main point you're making has been made, try to summarize that you agree with the previous speaker so that we can be efficient about this and try to get everybody the opportunity to speak so that we get an essence of who is responding and in what regard, but let's try not to go over the same ground over and over again if we can. All right? So with, oh yes, and it's very important that you speak at the podium, that you give your name and your address, These is open for Simsbury residents to speak.
You want a time limit?
Yeah, we'll set sort of an informal 2 to 3 minute time limit. The commission and the chairman reserves the right to try to cut off someone that's going a little long, because we would like to hear from everyone who has something to say. All right? Mr. Smith? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Brian Smith. I'm an attorney with Robinson & Cole, LLP, 280 Trumbull Street, Hartford, Connecticut. I'm here representing Mark Sullivan, who is the petitioner, who's right here, and he and his wife, Charith Sullivan, are in the room. Also with me is co-counsel David Sherwood, who's assisting in this matter. And I'm going to address, as you asked, the moratorium. And so what is it we're asking, and why are we here asking for a moratorium? Well, like so many zoning issues that come before you, there's typically a catalyst, something that starts the reason that somebody is going to make the effort and wake up to the situation at hand. And so in this instance, Mr. Sullivan lives at 52 East Weatog Street. That's in the East Weatog Historic District. As you know, you come off Route 185, you see the sign right there. You go down the street. And he moved there many years ago. He's been in real estate as a professional owner of real estate since 1981. And he very much admired the historic district, the stability an historic district provides, and thought this was an ideal location for him and his family. And 3 generations of his family live there. His father, he and his wife, and their daughter. So it's a very important location, obviously, for him. Like everybody in the room, you have your house, you love your property. So what relevance does that have? Well, next door to him, there was a 4-acre piece of property, and that's fine, and it was property, but what happened, let's see, get this located. This is a survey prepared by for Patricia Hippa, and in blue is the outline of her property here.
Can you just hold that up a little bit?
I'm sorry, yeah, it's actually sank below the podium here, but and I'll show it to the public in a minute.
Okay.
But so the blue outline there, that is the HIPAA property. Mr. Sullivan is immediately adjacent to her property there. And that was approximately 4 acres that she owned, and that will become very relevant in a minute. Thereafter, she did a land assembly, which you're allowed to do, and she obtained this strip of land. It's about 20 feet wide. You can see it in pink, and all the way down to another corner of property, which is approximately an acre when you add all this together to get to 5 acres. And why is that relevant in Simsbury? For the public, that's what it looks like, in case anyone could not see it. Because that is the minimum acreage necessary to establish yourself, if you wish, as a farm. And that's okay, but the question is, when you're operating a farm and you have horses, what's the limitations on a farm? What is distinguished between those who want to own horses who are not farms but just have a certain amount of acreage? And in Simsbury, if you have an acre and a half, you can have horses already. You don't need 5 acres to have horses and enjoy horses for personal use. But if you want a commercial operation, you would need to have 5 acres. Once you're at 5 acres, there's really very little regulation in Simsbury on the aspects of this kind of farm. There's a little bit about manure, not management, but storage, location, and setbacks for buildings, but that's about it. And you can have an unlimited number of animals once you get to the 5 acre point. So that was the catalyst. Once we looked at the regulations to say, well, there's not going to be a problem here, but there are really very few standards. So we took a twofold approach. The first was, we want to keep everything in the status quo because, as you can see from the room, I'm sure it's of great interest to many people on what you do with these proposed regulations. And for this, you need time to consider it in a rational manner. And the best way to do that throughout the state of Connecticut is for the Zoning Commission to impose a moratorium to keep the status quo while you look and while you consider the regulations that either we propose or anyone else proposes. And the question then becomes, well, a moratorium that stops people from utilizing their property going forward on new things, so how's that fair? Well, first of all, it's fair because you have to get the moratorium approved like you do any zoning regulation, which is why we're here tonight asking for this first. And then also, your moratorium cannot be for a long period of time. It has to be, the case law suggests that the longest you could ask for would be 9 months. Westport did that. Westport does a lot of things. But we are not asking for a 9-month moratorium. And of course, if you develop regulations in the interim, you don't need to keep the moratorium in place if you develop new ones in 2 months or you approve something tonight. You don't need to have it stay for 6 months at that point. But what we're asking for tonight is that you impose a 6-month moratorium for a very limited specific purpose, which is not to allow, and I can walk you through the new the proposed moratorium language, but it is specifically that no application of any kind, including a certificate of zoning compliance or a building permit, will be accepted, processed, reviewed, approved, or otherwise permitted by the Zoning Commission or the Zoning Enforcement Officer pursuant to Article Section 7B1 for a farm, as that term is defined by Article 4B, or pursuant to Article 7B6 for the keeping of horses after the effective date of this amendment, which we leave blank because that's up to you, for a period of 6 months or until December 17th, 2013, whichever is later. And I've already explained the purpose, which is in the body of the text, is to allow this commission an opportunity to study impacts and the differences between, and how one would regulate the difference between use of horses for residential and personal enjoyment and commercial operations. Now, I want to add one additional aspect into evidence for this. I think I'm going to ask you, Mr. Chairman, how best to do this. Mr. Peck had a staff report that was made available to us on July 12th. We have some comments. That staff report addresses 3 different things. It addresses what the Planning Commission actions were on July 9th when we were there before them. In summary, although the minutes were not available until this afternoon, at least that I could find from the Planning Commission, but I was there. It also talks about the moratorium and his comments as to the moratorium. It also talks about the proposed zoning regulations, which will be the next hearing that we will be doing. So I have a letter responding to those comments, and I want to make sure that that letter is in the record for both the moratorium as well as for the zoning regulation hearing that we'll be having later. So I would like to enter that as at a point before we get to the close of this discussion. But before that, what I wanted to say is that the Planning Commission, and I recite this in my letter, although, as to the moratorium, there's really no referral from it because it had a tie vote on a positive. It went 2-2, so nothing happens. It's not a positive, not a negative. Some thought it was good, some thought it, they're right in the middle. So what does that mean? That means that this commission can approve the moratorium by a simple majority vote, if it so chooses, which is what we think you should do. Now, the Planning Commission did a little bit more than that, though. And I'm not sure that comes out as fully as one would want to see in the staff report or the minutes, but I will relate what I believe they were saying, is that the proposed regulations that we will hear about later are consistent with the 2007 Plan of Conservation and Development. The Planning Commission members did agree that there is a need to differentiate and set standards for between personal use of horses on property and commercial operations. There are two different kinds of uses, and that they need to have different standards made up. And so that, and they, as we will get into this later, were supportive, largely with some exceptions, of the personal use language that we had proposed, which we'll get to the next hearing. They were less enthusiastic about the commercial standards that we had proposed, but we'll address those in due course. How does this commission, why does it need the time for a moratorium? Well, we did more than just make up regulations. We were careful in looking at a number of different communities in the state of Connecticut that have dealt with equine uses, and we looked not only at those that might be favorable to us, but those that are in the valley here, that, and see what kind of regulations they had in place as to commercial versus residential uses for horse-related activities. And I have a chart which I will hand in, and what it shows in this chart, and I have all the regulations as well for the benefit of the commission, is the chart has commercial stable defined along the top. It's which town we're looking at, and maybe what I'll do is hand this out first, which may be better, so that you can follow along. What's that? Oh, sure. Sorry. All right. So what I have here, which I gave to each member of the commission and staff, is a table of various kinds of aspects of zoning standards in the number of different towns, including what exists in Simsbury, what we propose in Simsbury, as well as the following towns: Portland, Weston, Granby, Farmington, Greenwich, Suffield, Avon, Reading, Glastonbury, Somers, and Killingworth. And there's a number of the towns, not every last one of them, but a number of the towns that look at commercial and differentiate between that and residential use for horses. A great number of these towns also you utilize special exception criteria when looking at this kind of use for commercial stables. And then there's also the questions of lot area per horse, setbacks for commercial and setbacks for residential use, what a farm lot area, what a minimum lot area for a commercial operation would be. So I've set this information out for the benefit of the commission when you analyze both whether a moratorium is needed and whether people here have the interest in having the moratorium in place, and also when we get to the next discussion about the specific regulations that we are proposing. So, but I wanted to hand that to you now during this hearing because this shows that there's a lot of thought that's been given throughout the state about this very issue. So this is not just arise because one person. This is a serious issue, and one that we submit respectfully needs to be addressed by this commission. And the best way to do that is to impose a moratorium, hear out everybody who has an interest in this issue, and then make your decisions on our regulations and any comments that others may have. So that's the sum and substance of that. I can provide a copy of the regulations that can be effective as of both hearings for you. Mr. Chairman, would you like me to do that? I have set-
No, I think we're really going to stick to the question of whether or not there should be a moratorium
Okay.
as separate from the merits of the proposed regulation.
No, I'm not suggesting that. I have copies of the regulations of the other towns, is what I'm saying.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. I can offer that for both hearings, if you will, if that would be acceptable to you.
That's fine. All right.
So I will turn those in now, but I then ask that they be also
Okay.
considered for the next hearing when we get to the merits of it.
All right. Thank you.
The purpose of that is just to demonstrate that there is a lot of information. These are excerpts of the various towns. It's not the entire zoning regulations of each town. They're separated by blue pages, much to the distress of my staff having to do this, but they're there. And so the information should be available. It's in the same order as the table that I presented to you. So now, let me just summarize by saying, again, I think there is a need for this. I think there is sufficient interest in the community to analyze this issue. And if you don't have the status quo in place, then it's sort of, well, what's the point of having a thoughtful consideration of the regulations at this time? So thank you very much. I'm concluding with this part of my presentation for now.
All right. So go ahead, Hiram.
Do you want questions?
Yeah, I think that if the commissioners have questions for Mr. Smith, we should ask them now before the public hearing, and then we can come back later, just to clarify items.
I have a question. As far as the other towns are concerned, I mean, that's great that we have comparisons, but each town obviously has a different land mass, number, acreage, setup. So as much as we want to try to compare and contrast, I think that's a good idea. But I also want to take into consideration the fact that Simsbury has an identity of its own.
Oh,
And I
absolutely.
wanna remember that as we talk.
Yeah, and that's why we tried to develop specific regulations tailored to the town of Simsbury and as the next step. But we wanted to let you know that right now, Simsbury doesn't have a lot of regulations in place. So we did look at other towns to see what did and in some instances did not work. So,
Right, and I think it's very helpful.
okay.
Question of moratorium, that would be on any properties that are affected right now that may have been already purchased for these purposes, so it would go back and stop everything right now?
I mean, if someone's already operating, it doesn't affect them. But if someone is not operating yet, it's going to affect them,
Just be
yes.
curious how many properties fall into that. Do we have that information? That'd be too hard to figure that out.
We have some information, and perhaps I can sort of collect it all at the end of the evening.
Just like to see what effect this really has on the market here.
And I want to be clear that the moratorium is on any building permit as it relates to residential or commercial keeping of
For horses, yes.
horses.
For horses. It's not any
Horses.
building permit for any purpose. It's, I mean, if you want to put an addition on your house, it doesn't stop you from doing that. As any moratorium, have to be very specifically aimed at a type of use, and that's what this does.
I have a question.
Yes.
I understand you want to have us understand what other towns have been doing, and it'll take time to digest that material, but why does imposing a moratorium assist in that process? Why do we need a moratorium to look at the regs?
Well, because when you're thinking about new regulations of a use that we submit has some controversy, it is best to leave the status quo in place, because some people don't want new uses being developed while you're trying to come up with new standards. And that's including my client. So that's the reason. And I think it's more than just him that wants the status quo to be imposed until you have new regulations. And it's, you know, I know this commission and others have imposed it from time to time, and we submit that this is one of those issues where that should be done.
Dave, you all set? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Smith.
And I will be submitting this letter in response to the staff memo when at the appropriate time.
Just one clarification.
Yeah.
Mr. Smith said that the commission could enact a moratorium for 6 months or some shorter period of time if it chose. I just want to be clear, the wording in the proposed moratorium says 6 months or December 17th, 2000, whichever date comes later. So the proposal is for at least 6 months. Correct? In other
No,
words, it's not.
no, maximum 6 months,
Maximum 6 months.
the way it's worded.
Maximum 6 months.
6 months is always going to be later than December 17th. So you
We
can
can't go
forget
back in
about
time.
December
It
17th.
really depends on when the commission acts.
Right.
You know, frankly, you have 2 months after the close of the hearing to act, and my
So
point
it's
is.
6 months.
It's 6 months from whenever we act. Is that your point, Hiram? It's not 6 months from today, it's 6 months from whenever we impose the moratorium, if we do so.
Or December 17th, if that comes before the 6 months, then that's the cutoff.
No, it's
Well,
Whatever's
it won't
later.
now, but
Oh, I see.
it no longer will. When we first submitted the application, that's what, you never know what the timing is going to be, so we're optimistic.
Okay.
later of.
Okay.
So at this point, if you pass it, it's going to be 6 months
Right, I
from
got
when
it.
you act.
Right. All right, thank you. We will now take comments from the public in the order that they signed up. Michael Downs.
My name is Mike Downs. I live in Weetog. I'm a longtime resident of Simsbury. I bought my house in 1982. I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I just feel it would be, considering the value of a historical district, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for a 6-month moratorium at this point to give everybody a chance to not so much rush into it, but just to digest what's going on. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
What was your address? I'm sorry.
I have 72, I'll say I'm 72's Weetog, I'm sorry,
Simsbury Manor Drive.
Simsbury Manor Drive. Thank you. All right, next up is John Lavery of 298 Hop Meadow, Weetog.
John Lavery. First of all, I notice everyone here has a microphone and no one is using it. I'm sitting back there, I'm an old guy, and I can't hear anything. And I apologize if some of my comments are not appropriate to whatever has been said here up to now. First of all, it seems to me that Mr. Sullivan's problem is with a neighbour. And why the rest of us are going to be subjected to a moratorium or some other situation that he might devise doesn't make any sense to me. I've visited his neighbour's house. I've seen a beautiful job of fencing. I understand the lady's going to keep 2 horses there, which she currently owns. And I noticed that in some of his comments he objects to teaching. I've owned horses in Simsbury for 46 years. I've taught dozens of children to ride. I have never had a complaint from a neighbour, or anyone else for that matter, about anything to do with the horses on my property. My manure pile, it does not smell because it's a well-kept manure pile. And anyone who thinks that the problem with horses is the manure is really wasting their time, because that's not a problem, provided, of course, it's properly looked after. Now, I'd like to say a couple of things. Number one, he's made comments about the historical concerns with horses. I had the pleasure of doing a reenactment of the ride of Paul Revere down Main Street in Simsbury in 1976 at the request of the Simsbury Historical Society. And it was a great success, and everybody enjoyed it. And actually, I have a picture here which I've given to Dave Ryan to show to the other members of myself with the first selectman in town on that occasion. Horses are the one animal that I can think of who have earned a real place in American history. No question about it. And anyone who wants to curtail their use should think twice. I mean, I understand that there can be problems with neighbors, but I've been involved in the horse community here all those years, and I see a lot of people here who I've had the pleasure of competing with and whose properties I've competed on, and none of us have ever had a problem. So I would suggest that you forget the moratorium and ask that the applicant solves his problems on his own with his neighbor the way the rest of us would do. I don't think he has a problem to start with, but that's what I propose that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lavery. And the microphones are not for amplification, they're for recording purposes, so we apologize for that if you can't hear us. Thomas J. Reagan of City Place 1 in Hartford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Commission, my name is Tom Regan. I'm a partner with the law firm of Brown Rudnick LLP. I'm here tonight representing the Ethel Walker School, and as a note, I'm also a Walker's parent. I am going to try to keep my comments to this part of the conversation very brief and to the moratorium. In fact, I'll have further comments later on with regard to the proposed regulations. But the moratorium presents a real concern and a real problem for walkers. I know 6 months doesn't seem like a long period of time for anyone, and Walkers at the moment has no proposed plans for the equestrian facility, but I want to remind this commission, we've been before you twice in the last year with two major projects, the first being the artificial turf fields, the second being the dorm. I was heavily involved in both of those projects, both on the Planning Commission and representing the school. Both of those projects came to life from the time they were first conceived through approval in this commission and starting both projects. I actually think the fields were done in less than 6 months. The moratorium, as it's presently drafted, would prevent any permit, including a building permit, for being issued for anything related to horses. That means Walker's current facility, with regard to the equestrian facility, would be at a stalemate for 6 months. This is a real problem for the school. As I said, we don't have anything planned at the moment, but as you've seen, things move very dynamically, and they move dynamically for many reasons. They move dynamically as a result of financing, which was the case in the dorm. They move very quickly in the event of a GIF, which was the case of the field. So the school needs to have that ability when it has a project to move. A moratorium in this regard, with regard to these regulations, would leave them in complete limbo. If a donor were to come in and offer them a gift to enhance the riding program, and I'll talk more about the riding program and its benefits to the town later, they wouldn't be able to do anything for 6 months. That could be critical or death for the project and could be a significant problem for the school. So with regard to the moratorium and as it's presently drafted, that creates a real problem for the school. So I just want to raise that with the commission. I'll leave the majority of my remainder of my comments until we get to the second half of the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan Mitchell of 165 Old Farms Road, West Simsbury.
Hi, good evening. Well, Mr. Lavery and Attorney Regan said it very well. I'm just going to represent quickly some of the issues that come from putting a moratorium on the residents. There are residents out there that have horses at home right now. They may have plans to build a run-in shed before winter or a shed for their hay. A moratorium would stop that. It's inappropriate for this gentleman, who clearly has an issue with his neighbor, to be putting all of us in this position. Simsbury has always dealt with things in an easy way. We've never had an issue. We've never needed an issue. We've always been able to deal with things as a farm community, loving, caring, nice community. I don't understand why we're being put into this position right now, but I do think it needs to be considered strongly to oppose the moratorium.
Thank you. Is it Laura Bertrand? 27 Quarry Road, Simsbury?
Lori Bertrand.
Sorry.
Okay, I've been a long-time resident of town since the 1970s. I came here then and brought my horses. I've been here and worked in real estate all these years as well. I know what the real estate property values are here. I get the comments from all the people coming in and out of the area about how beautiful this community is and how they love the views of the pastures, the horses in the pasture. In fact, all the road races are over in my neck of the woods on Quarry and Terry Plains Road, East Weetog Street area. And all the races are held there because they love the beauty of this community. And the compliments of the views of the pastures and the horses. And I would hate to see that taken away. It really would be a shame. There's so many people here and children that want to have a horse in their yard if they comply. And I don't understand why this would have to happen to stop all these people and the joy and the pleasure that these animals give everyone. So I absolutely think this ought to be really looked at seriously so that this is not going to happen. The moratorium is not going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Seelig, 40 Riverside Road.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Could I just respectfully request that you consider asking the audience to hold their applause? As much as we all enjoy sitting here, it does kind of just extend the meeting.
I think that's a reasonable request. All right, so we'll honor that. Mr. Seelig?
Good evening. I'm Bill Seelig. I have a little farm over on Riverside Road. It's a farm that I've been working on for a while, and I hope to, in the future, turn it into something that would be certainly affected by these regulations. I also hope to put a shed in. I've gone through all the approvals of the wetlands and zoning and everything else to put sheds in. I hope to do that in the next 6 months. So this affects me directly. I would like to see a show of hands of the number of people here who are here because they support this moratorium, just to have an idea of who's supporting it. I see a couple people that are supporting the moratorium. I will certainly have other comments when we get to the other portion of things, but I would like to remind people that before there were cars, there were horses. For thousands of years. I don't know if people realize that horses are allowed on most roads other than superhighways. And I'd also like to mention that I was able to, when we had someone new coming into the community, Patty Hippa and her family, while she was building her facility, she needed a place to keep her horses. She kept them on my property. That would not be allowed by these regulations. And as a good neighbor, I was very happy to do that for her, to welcome her to the town, and also mainly because it allowed her kids to ride. And I think that that's a very important thing, and I think it's our right to have horses. And if something isn't broke, why fix it? So this moratorium, I think, affects a few people like me, not a lot of people. And I think that there really is not a whole lot of reason for it, because what's going to happen? A bunch of people are going to rush in the next 6 months and build horse facilities here in Simsbury? That's ridiculous. That's it.
Thank you. Hold your applause, please. Nevin Christensen.
Hi, John.
From Nevin Christensen, 44 West Mountain Road. From a purely economic standpoint, I'd like to see horses banned from Simsbury so only I can have them and make a lot of money. But from a realistic standpoint, I can understand regulating horses with there can be some problems if they're overcrowded. There can be environmental degradation. There can be problems, absolutely. From a realistic standpoint, I don't see the moratorium as doing any real good, personally. And there's been, in many communities throughout this country, I believe there's been a degradation of the quality of life that is brought by people being in touch with animals, nature, and stuff. And that seems to be, especially in the wealthier communities, being degraded and degraded and degraded. I make a great living by children coming to my farm that don't know which end of the animal makes poop. And I would like to see, I think it's important that we stay in touch with horses, animals of all sorts, nature, and yes, we have to be concerned about possible interactions of horses and neighbors that don't like them, but I don't see the moratorium as fixing that problem.
All right, next, Stacy Saven.
Stacy Savin, 55 Highwood. I've been a Simsbury resident for, I've owned my land, which abuts both parcels for 20 years. And I really am in favor of some kind of moratorium because I do think that there is a distinction between a commercial use and private use of animals on your land. I love horses, and I agree that Ms. Hippa has done a lovely job in the fencing and so on, but that's quite a different thing from having below you a commercial operation. And I think anybody here could understand that that would be something that would cause them concern if it's a new use to the neighborhood, as it is. So I understand the comments made by those horse owners that are already having their horses in commercial use. They wouldn't be affected. And I suppose a moratorium could be drafted to allow people who have horses not for commercial use to continue to go ahead with their plans for the sheds or whatever they need. But in this particular neighborhood, where there has been no commercial horse farm, and where apparently one might be able to be produced, I have a problem with that. So I want to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Patricelli.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Bob Patricelli. I'm the owner of the commercial horse farm that is in the ladies' neighborhood. That's Folly Farm. And we are just a few hundred yards away from the petitioner's property at the corner of East Weetog and Hartford Road. And I oppose the moratorium. I will try to limit my remarks to the moratorium issue, as tempting as it may be to get in the merits. But to do that, I need to take you back a little bit to our origins. Folly Farm was historically one of the signature farms of Simsbury, like Tuller Farm. And it went into bankruptcy. An individual had acquired it, came before this commission many years ago in the 70s, proposed to subdivide it for townhouses. This commission wisely decided not to permit that subdivision, and the individual put the property into bankruptcy, and it was taken over by the bank, and I bought it with a partner in 1983. I was able to buy it only because we had a feasible plan to install a commercial horse operation on that 155 acre property. It is important for the town to support appropriate commercial horse operations as a means of preserving farmland and a way of life, and as Mr. Christensen said, an educational opportunity about animals. It would create a hardship on us at Folly Farm to be subject to a moratorium, not to be able to make building improvements. Those improvements, by the way, would presumably include to the residences in which our farmhands work, because that would be interpreted as, I suppose, a horse-related operation. We have never had a complaint from our neighbors. We think we're good neighbors. We see no need for you whatsoever to consider a moratorium, and indeed, Mr. Sullivan's neighbors apparently completed her work. There's no apparent threat of a further undertaking that would perhaps justify a moratorium. So why permit the few of us who are trying to keep properties together and in farm use, who are using commercial horse operations, to have to freeze in place and potentially suffer real economic harm? Finally, let me say that I don't know why the attorneys for Mr. Sullivan have chosen to develop an elaborate regulation on commercial operations, commercial horse operations, when that is not what Mr. Sullivan is living next to. So did we suddenly become a target for some reason that I'm not aware of? So that's, I know, verging on the merits, and I apologize for that. But if you were to grant a moratorium, it seems to me you would be given credence to the idea that regulation of commercial horse operations is necessary and appropriate in Simsbury, and you're just trying to figure out how to do it. And frankly, I see no reason whatsoever for you to start down that path. Thank you.
Thank you. Cherith Sullivan? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Okay, I'm Cherith Sullivan at 52 East Weetog Street. The moratorium is one thing. I think that what concerns me most is the difference between a commercial operation and a personal use of horses, because I like horses as well, and they're right next door to us, and we look right at them. So, you know, I do like them, but if you get into shows where you might have, you know, bullhorns going off early on the weekend mornings, you know, maybe a lot of traffic, people parking all over the grass in front, you know, I don't know what would come with what she wants to do. I'm not even sure whether she is going to become commercial or not. You know, I don't know if it's for personal use or if it's for commercial, and I think there should be, you know, regulations concerning, you know, what goes where, and should a commercial horse farm really be in the middle of a residential area? And that's my concern. Not so much the moratorium, but that's it.
Okay. Patty Hippa.
Yes, my name is Patty Hippa at 42 East Weetog Street. But first of all, I'd love to introduce my children. This is Kari Hippa, Reno Hippa, and Cal Hippa, and they are all equestrian riders and really good at it. I truly feel, I'm not sure what this would accomplish, the moratorium. I have no idea. You know, people couldn't buy farms for 6 months. They couldn't buy acreage to build horse farms. I have no idea what the purpose would be for it. Maybe the purpose would be that one person, unhappy person, is protecting himself, that my neighbor, that I'm legally have horses on my land and doing things legally. Yeah, I'm just speechless, be honest with you. Yeah, that's it.
Leonard DeMeo.
Hi, my name is Leonard DeMeo. I live at 4 Cobtail Way. I also sit on the executive board of Upper Folly Farm. And from my understanding, when that property was sold by Lower Folly Farm, it came with a regulation book like this. The regulations were to protect Lower Folly Farm and the residents of that street from each other. It's far stricter than anything in this town. I'm for the moratorium, but I'm against the length of it. I think the board should be able to act quickly, and the question here is regarding regulations on whether it's a residential or commercial. It seems to be a gray area, and I know from driving by the property, I had mixed feelings. I like horses, I love the farms in Simsbury, but if my bedroom window was right outside of it and it became a commercial situation, then I may not like it. And that it sits in a historic society, I can't just erect an 8-foot fence and block it off. So I kind of have mixed feelings. If the moratorium could move quickly, say in a month, and it would give the commission the time to address the regulations, maybe bring the two parties together, then to me, I'm for it. Thank you.
And Paul McKenna.
I'm Paul McKenna, and I haven't been here as long as some, but I've been here longer than others. I'd like to thank the Commission for spending the time to listen to this discussion. In a rural community such as this, I think this would be a poorly portrayed issue of Flatlanders, city people against horse people. I don't think that's the issue here at all. And quite frankly, I feel badly that it's being portrayed as this. I think it's an unfair portrayal. I don't think it's just at all to the complainant or the petitioner, whatever you want to call him. And I think it unfortunately unfavorably sides with the person who is trying to put forth a commercial enterprise in a residential neighborhood. I have adjoining my property a number of acres. It's completely surrounded by residential. I'd be very disappointed if somebody could just arbitrarily come in and say, well, there's no really good regulations. I think we'll just cut down all these trees and put in a horse farm. That would be very disappointing, and it would certainly be disappointing if there were no clear regulations. I support the moratorium, and I don't mean to get involved with the specifics, but quite frankly, I think this plot plan is somewhat akin to a Thomas Paine caricature of a gerrymandered voting district to say that this qualifies. I think the plot plan in and of itself is a very clear indication to this committee, this council, so whatever, this group of leaders need to come together to help protect the existing horse people with their dignity and their contributions to this community without allowing somebody to come in and creating something that meets the code, but in fact does not at all meet the community standard. And I think that's why the moratorium should stand. I do think that it should be limited. I think the 6 months, there's been a lot of information handed out here. We have a number of very historical communities here in town that are very well represented and are absolutely the centerpiece of Simsbury in many ways. They have their various ways that they have superseded any standard that anybody could come up with in some of these other communities. And I think it's something that people could work together with, a very favorable thing that speaks very favorably about Simsbury. But I do agree that a moratorium is appropriate for a very short period of time. I think the information, much information has been put out already, and I think there's more than enough willing farms people here that would be happy to help shape it so that it could be very favorable. And residential people who pay a very substantial portion of the taxes in this community, as we all know is very much complained about, would not feel threatened if they happen to live adjacent to private property that could be just arbitrarily by an owner converted to commercial and then petitioned afterwards. Thank you very much.
We had a sign-up sheet, and that's the last person that signed up. I would like to suggest that we well, we have a whole nother topic, and I would like to, in the interest of time, how many people would like to speak purely to the moratorium that have not spoken? All right, we'll give you each a minute. So just come, state your name and your address.
Hi, I'm Regina Landsberg, 278 Old Farms Road, and I just moved up here 3.5 years ago from Stamford in Fairfield County, and one of the reasons, or the big reason, actually people at work call me Little Miss Green Acres, because I moved up here because I wanted a different lifestyle, and I bought a horse farm, and I see this moratorium as going forward. I would have been devastated had I bought this property and not been able, and there were not horses on there because the owner had moved out, and the house was empty for a year. So this moratorium could have been pretty devastating to me to try and get the lifestyle and the time and the wonderful place that Simsbury is, and all the good things about it that I didn't have down in Stamford. And I see this moratorium as really being potentially devastating to people who be in the same situation as I'm in.
Thank you.
My name is Kiki Levin-Gardner. I live at 51 East Weetog Street. I just want to say that I do agree with the prior male speaker. Don't remember your name. I think it's very important that we go ahead because this is not about Weetog Street. This is about Simsbury. This is about changing and looking at the zoning for the whole town. And I think we need to make decisions very carefully, very planfully. And I think a moratorium would help us do that. I also think that what came up over and over is that people who are already having horses are very nervous about whether or not they will be able to continue. What I heard from the attorney was not that there would be an imposing of an infringement, or what the word is, on their rights to continue to do what they are doing, people who are currently already in the business. I think we need to look forward and make sure that we move forward as a town with really clear guidelines for what we want to be. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ron Vance of 17 Hallview Drive. I love horses. My kids love horses. I'm here supporting the moratorium tonight because I learned something frightening over the past year, and I'm shocked that it hasn't come up. I've been here 8 years. I've put several $100,000 of improvements in my home, and it's now worth less than it was when I purchased it 8 years ago. And I've gotten feedback from a couple of different people that I think should concern everyone in this room. And the comments have been, Simsbury is just not the place it used to be. I would recommend that before anything's done, this committee give careful consideration to what obviously is kind of a vague regulation. Thank you.
Somebody else over here? Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Richard Kuziak at 8 Riverside Road, or as I sometimes affectionately refer to it as Riverside Motor Speedway. As you can imagine, we do have intermittent traffic abatement issues. I don't know that a commercial activity at that location would exacerbate them or not. I'd rather not find out. I am smack dab geographically between Mr. Selig's location, which is wonderful, and this other location, which is, in my opinion, not so wonderful. At any rate, it's interesting to me that we have some fairly strict rules in this town regarding signage, but not regarding equine facilities. We have very interesting rules regarding easements, swimming pools, outbuildings. Yet for some reason, it boggles my mind that I'm being told that there are no clear guidelines and rules on property, commercial or otherwise, where horses are utilized or enjoyed. I think that's a problem. I don't know if a moratorium is the right way to go here, but I think it's worth exploring if we can protect the interests of homeowners and residences as well as commercial enterprises. I personally would not favor a commercial horse farm on East Weetag Street. But a bigger issue is we got to get some rules. Thank you.
Could you give us your name again? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Kuziak, K-U-Z-I-A-K, Riverside.
Thank you. All right, we're going to shut this off now, and I'm going to send around a list for the next public hearing. I want to be sure that everybody who wishes to speak signs up, and then we'll cut it off after that. We'll be here till midnight. So, well, we're going to discuss what we want to do amongst the commission.
Then I'd like an opportunity to respond.
Yeah,
That's not really.
yeah, no, we're not doing rebuttals tonight. You made your presentation. I think everybody's responded. Is that unusual, Hiram? Help me here.
Final comments or final summation at some point would probably be appropriate, whether you want to do it now, Mr. Chairman, or after the other one.
All right. So we have an open public hearing. We should decide what we want to do relative to the public hearing.
Well, if you're thinking of closing it, I definitely would say that they should get the final comment.
I'll allow you to make your final comment. There'll be no rebuttals to the applicant's final comment.
On behalf of Mr. Sullivan, I think that there's some misperceptions of what the moratorium may do should you pass it. One thing, for example, that somebody brought up was that you could not buy new acreage for a horse farm. That just doesn't, that's not even in this regulation, and that's just not there. It's a limited purpose, limited time effort. There was a number of supporters for the moratorium, and some of them had some rational thoughts about maybe it could be shorter than 6 months. And I asked the commission to consider that as a possibility, because you know yourselves best of all as how fast you would want to choose to work on this should you think you desire to impose or create new regulations to address this issue, which a number of people have articulated quite clearly, and I would respectfully suggest very well that there is an issue here. So that is the summation from my part in part. I mean, just specifics that one person made about Folly Farm. It's about 7/10 of a mile away from Mr. Sullivan's house.
I want to cut that off. We're not going to go point by point.
No, I'm not.
We've given you a
I'm
chance
not.
to summarize meaningful material relative to what was said.
And but the density of many of the areas here are very different than what is portrayed and what we are asking the commission to do on a limited basis. So, my co-counsel has one remark on summation.
Attorney David Sherwood, 2230 Main Street in Glastonbury, representing Mr. Sullivan. The proposed moratorium would not affect Ethel Walker. Ethel Walker is a school. School is defined under your regulations, and the proposed moratorium would only apply to applications per Section 7B1, which is a farm, it's not a farm, or Section 7B6, domestic animals accessory to residential use. And that's not how horses are handled at Ethel Walker. The intention of the moratorium and the intention of the regulation is that Ethel Walker not be affected at all.
All right, thank you. All right, so the question before the commission is whether we close the public hearing on the moratorium or we leave it open. My personal view is we've had substantial amount of public interaction, both for and against. I think the issues as it relates to us making the decision on this particular topic have been fairly well vetted by both the applicant and the public, and so I would be in favor of closing the hearing.
Yeah, and I would support that. I mean, I was concerned that it's the middle of July and we'd have
No
a
one would
poor
show up.
turnout, but we've got a good cross-section of folks here from all over town, and I would move that we close the public hearing.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so the public hearing on the moratorium is closed. We will consider the question after we have the public hearing on the proposed regulations. Hiram, there was a sheet that I had in that pad that was sent around. Where's the status of the sign-up pad? Okay. We'll begin with the presentation by the applicant. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Smith, Robinson & Cole, 280 Trumbull Street, Hartford, Connecticut, representing the petitioner, Mark Sullivan. And what you have before you is a petition to amend the zoning regulations for horse farms, stables in residential zoning districts. And the purpose of these regulations is, in fact, to do precisely what the perception is that of many, that there need to be regulations in place and standards that do not currently exist in Simsbury for commercial horse farm operations as well as personal use of horses in the town, and in particular in residential districts. And the reasoning behind this, of course, is, as has been previously articulated, is the need when you have conflicting land uses. It's very simple, is that some people think that, their use of their residence should not be affected by other types of uses without some standards. And one thing that is very important, and which I think is for all to realize, Mr. Sullivan, for example, was the president of Yukon Extension for 6 years. He's very familiar with agricultural land use. I mean, that's the School of Agriculture for Yukon. This is not, despite the perception you may get from others, an anti-horse proposal in any way. It is a regulatory tool to allow a better cooperation between neighbors, some who have horses and some who do not. And that is the purpose and the intent of these regulations, is to provide that guidance so that the zoning enforcement officer, the Howard Beaches of the world, have clear, articulated, and not unduly vague regulations of this is what's allowed, this is how it's allowed, and this is what's not allowed. And that's we submit isn't present yet in Simsbury, and that's why you're having this discussion. And there are a number of people who think that discussion deserves to be heard, and I think that the regulations we propose meet that. I will go over, I'm not going to go over each line, but I will hit the highlights if I may, with respect to the questions presented. And one thing that I did want to do at the outset before I don't know, Mr. Peck, did you provide the copy of the letter I sent this afternoon to the commission? Yes. Okay, well, I just want to I have the original. I just want to read one thing into the record so that everyone else has it. I sent during the course of the Planning Commission meeting, Mr. Sullivan asked me to make a modification of the proposed regulations you have before you to exempt established schools from the new standards that would be imposed should you pass this. So, and we did that July 9th. And we have refined that particular language. We think it's better language that we provided to you. I sent a copy to Mr. Peck earlier today. I think you may have that, but I have the original, which I'm not sure who I'm supposed to officially give it to. There you are. And I have additional copies if anyone needs them. But let me just read that language for the benefit of the public, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly.
Dear Chairman Pomeroy and Commission members, the petitioner Mark Sullivan wishes to modify his proposed definition of stable commercial by adding after the words "or similar establishment" the following. Well, let me read the whole thing. I just add that at the end so it makes sense. We have a new proposed definitions for stables, commercial stables, and non-commercial stable. Stable is any building or enclosed area used for housing, feeding, or caring for one or more horses. Stable commercial, a stable where horses are kept for compensation or for use by other than the resident or owner of the property, including but not limited to the boarding of horses, riding instruction programs, therapeutic riding programs, horse shows, riding competitions, commercial breeding, fundraising, or other charitable events, the renting of horses, or the keeping of horses incidental to the operation of a club, association, ranch, nonprofit organization, business, or similar establishment. And then I would add the language, but excluding any stable or stables owned or operated by established schools, such existing uses by an established school shall not be construed as non-conforming, and any additions or expansions shall be subject only to those standards contained in these regulations already in effect prior to, and then it would be the effective date of the adoption of the amendment. Now, so that's the definition of a commercial stable that we're proposing. A non-commercial stable will be a stable used solely for horses owned by the owner or resident that are used solely for personal use and not for uses listed under commercial stables. And under permitted uses, we would have a new Article 7B, and for horses for personal use. And there's we are actually increasing the density of the number of horses one could own, under this rubric, because in this instance, our proposal is there should be 1 acre as a minimum size lot for the first horse being kept, and an additional 1/2 acre for each additional horse, but there should be no more than 3 horses, and that's for non-commercial uses. Now it's presently 2, the way your regulations read, if you don't have 5 acres. So it's actually increasing the number of horses that you could have as a for personal use. We are offering other standards for manure and urine control. In the set of regulations that I would also like just make by reference that we provided from some of the other towns, the town of Reading, which is one of them, they have a whole list of information about horses and water, and the issues that one has, of public health issues and zoning issues and conservation issues, and those are reasonable manure management, taking manure off-site, not leaving it around, that sort of thing. Also, with respect to fencing, that it needs to be reasonably contain the horses within the property, which is a regulation that's commonly found in many of the towns, that you don't want a piece of police tape as your fence, but you want a fence that keeps horses in. And I know the farms in Simsbury know how to do that, and that's great. But someone new coming in, you want to be able to have the person, the zoning enforcement officer or the commission say, well, what's your plan? And to make sure, especially when you have smaller areas and less, it's not an operating farm, but it's a person just for the personal enjoyment of their house, and they say, well, I have 3 acres, I can get a couple horses on, but they don't think about adequate fencing. That's what we're giving the commission the discretion to say, you need to do this correctly, or the zoning enforcement officer. That's why we're suggesting it be in the regulations. The idea, when it's for personal use, is that the use of temporary buildings or trailers for stabling of horses in excess of 15 days is prohibited. So if you're doing it outside, you don't want a whole bunch of horse trailers, year-round for personal use. It's not a commercial operation. That's the concept there. Landscaping, no external flood lighting, And no loudspeakers. If you have personal use, there's really no need to have a loudspeaker system on site. Also, the use shall not have an adverse effect on historic property or an historic district. This comes out of other regulations that where towns have historic districts. Commission should be able to say, you're in an historic area or you're in an historic district. Is this compatible? And it's giving the discretion to the commission to make that decision. We're not saying it's a prohibition. It's a discretionary thought on the part of the commission because you are best able to make those decisions. But you need to have the regulation to allow yourselves to do that. Now, and I would hasten to add, this part that I just recited of the Planning Commission, for the most part, not every part, for the most part, they thought this was a good set of regulations. And the minutes have been made available so you can review what parts they did or did not like about the personal use of horses regulation when you decide to consider this. Commercial stables, we have, these are going to be permitted by special exception, and the purpose of having a special exception is again to give the commission more discretion, not less, because as you know, under Connecticut General Statutes 8-3C, the commission is given the power and ability to condition approvals, and within a set of parameters, you have a lot of discretion, and you can impose appropriate conditions that meet a particular use on a particular site in a particular part of town, which you don't, if you have just a site plan, you don't have discretion. Either they're good or they're no good, and you have to go up or down. Special exception, you say, well, you know, they have room here if they just move this and make a condition of approval, or you can have a better set of hours of operation if you're going to have a commercial operation that's new and it's coming in next to a neighbor. You say, good, have it for, limit the hours or adjust it to make good neighbors. Now the other proposal we are making is that if you're going to have a commercial operation and you're not already in existence, which all the speakers who have farms now are grandfathered by this. I mean, should you pass a new regulation, they're already operating. They're already farms. But I think they would all meet this in any event, but we are in the regulations saying if you want to create a new commercial operation, you need to have 10 acres, not 5 acres, for a horse farm. Many of the other towns in the state have done that. I understand Simsbury is unique, and I've been in, before Simsbury boards many, many years. The idea here is to look at the various zones and the agricultural sites and the density that you have in the various residential zones. And if you're going to have a horse farm as a commercial operation with a lot more than 3 horses, then you need some more acreage to handle that, and we think that's appropriate. There is a number of other aspects to it, but that are specific that have been addressed to try to, for dust control, for operation of horse shows, and buffer areas and that sort of thing. I'm not going to go over every detail because I don't want to. You've got them before you. So if you have specific questions about any aspect of this, I'm ready to answer those. But I just want to give you a flavor of what we are trying to accomplish. And the key here is to try to accomplish a differentiation that does not currently exist, except in the most general manner, between those who want to use horses for personal use and those who want to operate as a commercial venture. And so that's the sum and substance of what we are trying to accomplish. The specifics that I haven't already discussed, I'll be happy to discuss as the Commission's questions are raised.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
I'm confused about your proposal that 1 horse on 1 acre. Is that saying if you owned an acre, you could have a horse? Because our current regulation is 3 acres minimum, correct?
I'm sorry, I mean, I may have misspoken.
1 horse on.
Oh, yes, 3 acres, minimum 2 horses. And the proposal is 1 acre, first horse, each half acre, you get up to 3. So what I'm saying is the proposal would actually.
Doesn't really change anything, because if you have to have 3 acres, I mean, I'm confused by your proposal, I guess.
Well, if you had an acre, you could have a horse.
So every 1 acre lot in Simsbury could have a horse. That was your intention
Yeah,
with the
the
regulation?
horse people should like me for a minute.
A dog won't hunt.
I'm not sure about that.
Thanks.
All right. Do we have other questions, specific questions for Mr. Smith as it relates to from the commission?
What was the Reading reference?
Let me see if I can pull that for you so that.
You referenced them in relationship specifically to environmental concerns around water conservation.
Oh, okay.
Water use. Water.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I didn't, thank you, that's all I needed.
That's all you need?
I got it.
Okay.
Were there other regulations from the other towns you considered and did not include?
Yeah, yes. I mean, we took a lot, and not all by any means, of some of the, I think in my cover letter to you, I mentioned that we had looked at Portland, that we had looked at Weston, and we had looked at other towns. Some, for example, if you were to look at Farmington requires.
I don't want to go through
Well, no,
specifically,
but it requires more larger areas than we had. That we had rejected that. And to answer your questions, yes, we looked at a lot and we rejected a lot of things thinking that doesn't fit with Simsbury.
Dave, questions? Should we hear from the public? I think we should.
Yeah.
Sure.
Attorney Smith, can you go over the big picture plan developed under the town guidelines a couple of years ago relative to areas written out on the charts that towns published and won awards for in towns, particular to water courses, monuments, landmarks, territories of town. In their own language, COPC, COPD.
Yes, Plan of Conservation and Development. Yes, I mean the Plan of Conservation and Development is promoting and preservation of historic areas as they as they exist. East Weatogly, number 1 on that list. We have the Plan of Development. And this is one of the things that's why the Planning Commission found these regulations as consistent with the Plan of Development, and that's their function, to make a finding like that. They gave a negative referral. What they were giving in the negative referral was on the standards. They largely, if you fairly read the minutes, is on the commercial aspect of the regulations. But as to the Plan of Development and the concept of having a differentiation between these two, they said yes. And they said it is consistent. So I have, and that's something I would like to submit, is parts, I know you have this, but the Simsbury 2007 Plan of Conservation and Development, and I took excerpts from it, and on page 47, they talk about historic districts and farms, parks, recreations, and waterways, and number 1 historic district, East Weatogly Historic District. And this is what we want to protect community character. And what we are trying to do with these regulations is to protect community character. And if you look on the maps, which I've done in color for benefit of everyone, the way they were originally done, it shows these various districts in town and where the farms are located relative to them. And it is, and in fact, you're performing a function, or we're performing a function, all of us tonight, because one of the goals, policies, and objectives is conduct public meetings to gather citizen input to develop consensus about essential elements in community character of Simsbury. And I think that this is the classic land use discussion where you have two competing, both venerable uses, living in your own house and having horses. No one's opposing having horses. It's just how can you be best neighbors? So I'm going to submit these copies, and also I'd like to submit the letter that I had mentioned before, in response to Hiram before I sit down.
I just have a couple more questions as it relates to your definitions of commercial. Where do you, or your interpretation of your own regulation relative to the leasing of horses by a person who owns 2 horses and leases a half use to a neighbor child? Is that a commercial enterprise?
The leasing of horses, well, there's 2 definitions. The answer is that if you're going to lease a horse and it's going to be for someone other than your family or your whatever, it's going to be considered commercial. The issue is the location and the management of that.
So if you let a neighbor's friend ride your horse?
No, that's not commercial.
If the neighbor's child rides your horse and gives you $300 a month for hay, is that a commercial enterprise? This is part of the definitional issue that we're absolutely having to deal with.
My answer would be no.
Right.
I mean, if you think the answer, that my answer doesn't meet up with what we have proposed, that's the intent. So if you think the intent, I mean, unlike the old days of 20 years ago with zoning, where you had to either up or down a zoning regulation. I mean, there was no. I mean, I know we all can remember those days when, if we didn't write it perfectly the way you wanted it, you'd have to deny it outright. Now, if you say, Mr. Smith said this is the intent, but I don't think what he wrote is what he said. If that's what you think, and you want to change it, change it. Because that's what I'm telling you, that was not the intent. So.
All right.
And if I can hand it, this is a response to the staff memo, which I know Mr. Peck will at some point read in, or you already have. So I had a response to that I would like to submit to the commission. The original goes here, right?
All right. Where is the sign-up list for? Thank you. Thank you.
Nobody else?
So this will be the list.
Thank you.
Pardon me?
I have a process question.
Mr. Teller.
Don Teller, Teller Farm. You're holding a public hearing on these proposed regulations. Now, if you decide you want to do something but not adopt these regulations as proposed and come up with your own set of regulations, would then that be subject to a separate public hearing?
It's my understanding that's correct.
Sure. Okay.
That any regulations, proposed changes to the regulations of the zoning regulations require a public hearing. So there is a proposed, that's why we're here tonight for the second application, is there is a proposed set of revisions to the zoning regulations. If those are not adopted by the commission tonight, then, and we choose to, in response to the serious interest in the community to address this issue, propose our own changes, then we would propose those changes, we would publicly notice those, and we would have a public hearing to discuss those proposed changes as well. So this is not a one-shot deal.
Or it could be, but it might not.
It could be. Right.
But
correct.
So the other thing would be, should you decide that you were, if you decided to not act tonight,
and said you wanted to do something, you would be open to receive kind of written comments or whatever in regard to the
Always.
process.
Right.
Okay.
Always. What happened to my list? It's still circulating? No baseball game tonight. Hockey game.
Home run. Let me just get started, Mr. Chairman. I will. Let me just get started. The first two are Tom Reagan and Robert Patricelli.
I lost the other one. Yeah, 2 minutes max.
Good evening,
Boy,
Mr.
lawyer up first, 2 minutes.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Tom Regan. I'm a partner with the law firm of Brown Rudnick LLP, City Place 1, Hartford. I'm here tonight representing the Ethel Walker School. I will try to be brief, as I think my issue is somewhat different than some of the others who may have more to say on the merits. But as Attorney Smith has said, I think the intent, the school's concern is that these regulations not apply to the school. Writing is a central function to Ethel Walker. There's no question about that. And it is a character of the school and something that makes the school different from a lot of the other prep schools. And to have that is critical to the school. It's also critical to the community. And I don't need to remind the commission of an application I brought here many years ago that involved a very large subdivision, which went away for the good of everybody. And as part of that deal, in the land deal, we've memorialized through our agreement with the town the equestrian use of that property and the continued equestrian use of that property. And in fact, the school still maintains the right, not only on its property, but on the property that it's deeded to the town, to maintain that equestrian use. So I think everybody's recognized that it's critical, and it's critical to the town, not only critical to the school, critical to the town. It's an economic driver. Its events are an economic driver, and the community benefits greatly, including the use of that property by citizens for its equestrian use. So I think it's critical to us and our future for the school that this regulation not apply. The specificity of it, I don't think, is applicable to an educational facility. I think the proponents have agreed with that, and their amendment and their language, which exempts us from the definition of a commercial stable. So with regard to the school's position, I think as long as it were clear that the definition of a commercial stable would not apply to the school, and the school would maintain its current status, and anything it were going to do with the equestrian facility would maintain the current process. I think this commission knows the school well enough and has a comfortable enough relationship with the school, particularly through our last several projects, that we work very closely with the town, we work very closely with the commission to come up with good projects that work for everybody. It works for both parties. That would continue with any additions or expansions of the equestrian use, but I would just encourage the commission to adopt that definition, which excludes the school. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Robert Patricelli on deck, Nevin Christensen.
Let me start, Mr. Chairman, by thanking the members of the commission who take on these thankless jobs and spend hours as volunteers to serve the community. So I am going to ask you for 5 minutes, not 2 minutes. Mr. Smith has had at least 20 to 25 minutes to make his presentation, and Folly Farm is the principal, maybe only, commercial horse operation in Simsbury. And this proposal is aimed directly at us, so I will try to be brief. This proposal came out of the blue. I had no warning about this from Mr. Sullivan, whom I counted as a friend. We had no opportunity to work with town staff. We've had no time to prepare. We've been given no access to the documents that Mr. Smith has tendered or that might have been provided by the town. That said, I will make 5 points as to why this regulation is a bad idea. First, make no mistake, this is an attack on farms. Today, it's about horses. But what if Mrs. Hipp had put 2 cows in the property next to her? They smell a little worse than horses, by the way. Or tomorrow it's geese, or something else. I mean, why is it that the people of this historic district should feel like they should be protected against having animals next door. This is an attack on farms. This regulation, town-wide regulation, would limit the activity of any farm, potentially any animal. Second, it is not possible to create a bright line between personal and commercial use of these animals. If Bill Seelig down the road for us has got some extra stall space and we need some space for a couple of our horses, and I call Bill and I say, Bill, could you put up a couple of our horses and we'll pay you for feed and care, and or he wants to do the same with us. Or, I mean, the farm community operates as a community, and you help each other out, and sometimes you pay each other. And you made the point, Mr. Chairman, about it isn't just about personal use. What if it's your neighbor's kids? It's not just your own kids who want to ride on in your little riding ring. Is that make it commercial? Is that what the town has become? That we're going to regulate anything that happens on your property that you personally aren't managing? So that bright line doesn't exist, certainly in the equestrian world. Third, I don't believe that the residents of an historic district are entitled to more favorable zoning than anybody else. And that's what's being asked here. They chose to move into the historic district. They had the protections afforded by the State Historic Commission, which, by the way, designates districts entirely independent of any action of the town of Simsbury. You have no control over that. Why should they be getting, in effect, more favorable zoning, which they're kind of asking you to protect the historic district? Fourth, this is a wildly overreaching regulation as drafted. It says, for example, that you have to have 2 dedicated parking places for every horse stall. Well, we would have to have 120 designated parking spaces on Folly Farm. Where are we going to put 120 designated parking spaces? It says you can't have any storage in temporary buildings. Well, farmers store hay and other things in temporary buildings in the summer. It says you can't have, in effect, run-out sheds, temporary buildings for horses, for more than 15 days. Well, run-out sheds last for more than 15 days. It says you got to have, if you run a horse show, you got to have state and local regulated sanitary facilities. I bet that means you can't have porta potties. I hate to think how many toilets we'd have to build on Folly Farm to hold a horse show. And lastly, this regulation would flat out put us out of business because it says you can't have a commercial operation in an R40 zone, and we're about half R40 zoned. So this directly targets Folly Farm. We are out of business. There's no grandfather. Fifth, this just flat out isn't necessary. Manure management is already dealt with in your regulations. You can reach to noise issues by public address systems through other town ordinances if you need to. We've never had a complaint about having a loudspeaker system. Oh, by the way, your next door neighbor in your residential neighborhood could make a lot of noise too. And what are you going to say? You're going to outlaw, a phonographic system over 30 amps or something? Because, this just goes too far. There's been no showing that the proliferation of horse farms is undermining the community character. That statement's been made. Commercial horse operations threaten to undermine the community character of Simsbury. Where are they living? I mean, we're dying. Horse operations are struggling. Farms are struggling. We're not taking over the town. It's the opposite. So finally, the practical effect of this regulation is aimed directly at us as the only, to my knowledge, outright surviving, barely, commercial horse operation in Simsbury. Where did this come from?
There is one at the other end of the street.
Yes.
Commercial?
Well away.
Well away.
Oh, well away. I take it back. Well away. There's two of us, for now. Now, I would like, as a matter of, I think, fairness, I would like copies of any of the correspondence that town staff might have given to Mr. Price, advising him about how to tailor his regulation. I think this very last-minute amendment to exempt Ethel Walker and thereby remove one of the principal opponents is an example of a suggestion from town staff. I wish we'd had an opportunity to work with town staff on being exempted as well. So I'd like a copy of any correspondence from town staff to Mr. Price. I'd like a copy of any of Mr. Price's
Mr. Smith?
submissions.
Mr. Price? Price?
Smith, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith's submissions as well. I thank you for the extra time, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I really think this is a regulation which is looking for a reason, and it hasn't found one.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Bill Seeley? Paul McKenna is up next.
Well, again, thank you so much for taking all the time and listening to all us crazy people with all our different concerns. And I think that's a big part of what makes a community. I think that probably there are things that need to be addressed and looked at that are brought up as part of the concerns here. But I think there are a couple of things that really are directed in the wrong way. In the first place, there's a local school teacher, Allison Burke, that keeps her horse with me. Now, sometimes I charge her a couple $100s a month. Sometimes in the summertime when she's helping me more with the animals, I don't charge her. My farm meets the requirements of a commercial farm and would meet the requirements of the new commercial farm if it were advanced to 10 acres, possibly, because I'm trying to buy more property. But one of the things that doesn't seem to be addressed is people don't even know what a horse is anymore. In the first place, unless it's old and tired and outlived its companions, horses are herd animals. They don't want to be alone. So to have one horse is ridiculous, unless, as I say, it's retired or there are special circumstances. Secondly, I don't want to ride by myself. I want other people on my facility and with me because it's no fun to do it by yourself. So I think that there are a lot of things that really are confusing about the way that these issues were brought up. And I think that it really comes to the point of, I bought this property. It's mine. I met all the requirements when I bought it. I bought it specifically because of that. And now you're going to change the rules and make it either more difficult or impossible for me to do what it would seem like is my inalienable right to do. And I don't think that that's correct. And I think people are forgetting. I mean, I'd love it if we could have more farm types of activities and exposure to it. When I volunteered at the 4-H farm in Bloomfield, they'd have kids come up that wouldn't know that milk came from a cow. They'd have kids come that were afraid to touch a butterfly because they thought they were going to get bit. Is this where our society is headed? And is this where we want Simsbury to head? A historic district. Well, before 100 years ago, all there were horses in a historic district. So I really think that there are a lot of issues here that are very confusing, and I think one of the most confusing issues is this thing about it automatically becomes commercial if you have somebody else riding with you. And the people that do know animals know a lot about how to take care of them and what they need. And if they don't stay with it very long. So the ones that are going to have a lot of the problems that you're expressing or listening to, they're not going to be around by the time somebody comes and helps regulate it and so forth and so on. They're going to be gone anyways because they don't know what they're doing.
So time.
Thank you very much.
Paul McKenna and then Lori Bertram.
Thank you very much again for your time. As it said, my name is Paul McKenna. I didn't give my address before, 16 Pine Glen Road in Simsbury here. And as a healthcare practitioner for over 30 years, I am not interested in seeing the town be saddled with, with all due respect to those on the opposite side of the aisle, Nancy Pelosi's view of, well, we should pass it so that we can find out what's in it. I don't think that's the appropriate perspective here. I'm speaking as somebody who is concerned about land use and about owning property with a certain zoning requirement existing in that property and having somebody come in and totally just take over a property and completely rewrite the zoning because of vague regulations, and finding that even though I've been at that property for 30 years, somebody who just shows up in town can change what my neighborhood is. It sounds like, in all due respect to all the people that are speaking here, with respect, I didn't move to Simsbury because I wanted to live in an urban environment. Let's be clear about that. I also moved to town, and my mother was absolutely beside herself by the fact that there were no street lights, and there was no sidewalk for our children to ride bicycles on. And how was it going to be possible for them to ride to the store? She didn't understand a semi-rural environment, but that's where I wanted to be, and that's why I chose to live here. It sounds like the commission has more work on its hands than maybe the regulation proposed intended. But it would seem, with the varying opinions here, that there does seem to be a middle ground that needs to be achieved for those people who already own farms, for those people who are contributing to the spirit and the community of this town, both historical and ongoing, and where we need to head as a community. I'm not proposing that we should pass a regulation unread or uncontributed to. I think it's important that parties are heard on something that would have such a significant long-term impact on our town. And so I am speaking in favor of it, but with a somewhat guarded enthusiasm. But I speak very much in favor of it, protecting the rights of those who already own property in town, who bought property in town for, God bless you, whatever the original zoning intent of your property was. I think all rights need to be protected as this goes forward, but I think there is some protection necessary in the future. Thank you very much. And as much as I'd like to thank the commission, I'd like to thank everybody here coming out tonight. This is a very, very large turnout in the summer, and I really think this speaks a lot to our town and the interest that the people here have in terms of having the character of our town maintained and not just run off in one direction or another. So thank you very much. And I have to go babysit, so I'm sorry to leave before hearing the other people, but thank you again.
All right, Lori Bertrand with, thank you. Yeah. Lori Bertrand and Patty Hipp is up next. Lori?
I'm Lori Bertrand, 27 Quarry Road, Simsbury. When, well, I should start it off. I feel that the zoning regulations are quite adequate, and they're very, very defined and strict in the town. I came here years ago, and I had to follow those regulations to have my horses on the over 5 acres that I have. So I could have, I have 4 horses, and I'd like that to be considered, and I feel the zoning doesn't need to be changed. And I don't feel somebody who doesn't have horses or farms come in here and try to change the zoning and tell people how to put a fence up and where the building's got to go, because there are very defined rules and regulations defining where it has to be and what to do, and with the manure control and everything. you know, and so many feet off from a water course and everything. I think it's very strict and very adequate. This town has really maintained a very good job of guiding what's to be done and when. And I feel changing this and telling us how to do it is not the way to go. So that's how I feel.
Thank you. Patty Hippa. Howard Pinkham will be on deck.
Yes, Patty Hippa, 42 East Weetach Street. And first of all, if any of you have any questions for me, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but I would feel free to answer any questions that you have. When I moved to Simsbury and purchased in an historic district, I was beyond honored. I have grown up in an old house, love old houses. Just really respect the historic value of the area. We went in front of the historic district and they approved the design of the barn, the fencing, and so forth. And I have been in the horse industry, since I was 5 years old. I am a United States equestrian judge. My daughter is a graduate of Ethel Walker School. I have judged numerous and competed at numerous Folly Farm horse shows throughout, from Florida to wherever you want to go. And what he is proposing, or these rules are proposing, it is saying that I cannot use my horse to go to competitions. My children can't compete. I give lessons to my children at my house. And with the regulations that what Simsbury presently has, and I totally agree with you, are sufficient. So, do you have any questions? No?
Thank you. Howard Pinkham. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, thank you. My name is Howard Pinkham. I'm from 71 Hop Meadow Street in Weetog. I board horses. I board 2 horses at the Lavery's farm, Willapon Farm. Make no mistake about it, these people are not in a commercial business. They could not live on what I pay them, if and when I do. They provide this pasture for my horses to enjoy looking out, seeing horses in their field. They have 7 acres. They have a barn which has enough stables for four horses. They have 2 run-in sheds. Our horses are out all year long and use the run-in sheds. Occasionally, when the storms are bad, we bring them into the barn. Thank you very much. John provides that for me. We as a people need to stop this over-regulating of our lives and the limiting of our freedoms, especially in historic places. To throw out regulations that are working and have worked for years for some thought that someone next door might make a commercial operation is ludicrous. We need to stop this. We are overburdened with laws being made in 200 years. Why are we still creating laws? We should know it's wrong to shoot someone. We should know it's wrong to steal. We should know to take care of animals that are in our care. If we're not taking care of animals in our care, the Humane Society can get in there and deal with that. If they're not living up to standards that the town likes, write down those specific things and bring that to the people and ask the people if they want to change that. I appreciate you folks and the work you do, and I really think you got a, like someone said before, a thankless job. But if there were not this many people in this room today, I was worried that something would be stamped and then everyone in here would be affected because they could not speak. And I, for one, got on Facebook and said, get everyone out here. Because we have to stop. These little things are what's causing our country to go to hell. And it's time to stop. And I want to make sure that I appreciate what Mr. Patricelli said. I agree with every point he made. That's absolute on target. I agree with Mr. Seelig for being very well vocalizing of these concerns. This is a very important issue. It's silly to think that it even got to this point. Could they not just talk to these people and ask them what they're thinking of doing? Why does it come into a zoning board to change something? Thank you very much.
Susan Mitchell and then Stacy Savin.
Hi again, Susan Mitchell from 165 Old Farms Road. Everyone's done a great job of presenting a lot of the points that I would make. I will add to a few things. Bill Selig, you talked about having fun riding. It's also a safety issue. When you're riding alone, if you get tossed from a horse and you're there alone, there's a safety issue. People should have the right to have a friend over, to have somebody there, whatever. I totally agree that perhaps you have somebody leasing one of your horses, half leasing, sometimes because maybe you can't be riding them and they need to be worked. Things happen. I'm getting ready to go into surgery on my foot in a few months. We've got horses. They're not going to get exercise if I don't have the right to get people over there. I'm going to be unable to even put a toe down for 6 weeks. I'll be in a boot for 4 weeks. I'll have rehab after that. I can't have horses standing around not being worked. That's not fair to me. That's not fair to the animals. And a gentleman said before, Simsbury is not the town it used to be. He's right. I grew up in this town. My maiden name's Fitzgerald. My father had Fitzgerald's food stores. My husband grew up in this town also, and it used to be a tobacco town. Tobacco growing everywhere, barns everywhere, horses everywhere. And now all of a sudden, you're right, we've got all the McMansions going up and all these people that want to change things. I mean, if you want to look at the historic district, I'm sorry, but Mr. Sullivan's house doesn't really fit into the historic district that he's in. I'm sorry to say that. I'm sorry to offend you, but you have a huge wood pile covered with a blue tarp in the back. How come you don't have to shield that? How come she has to worry about shielding some horse fences? I'm not trying to be personal. I'm trying to be realistic. You can drive through town and people can have ornamentation in their yards. Or a broken down car, and all of a sudden having a horse is a problem. I don't see that anybody has asked Ms. Hippa what her intention is. Maybe that extra piece of land is for grazing. I've been by her place. You need land to graze your horses. So maybe her intention with that back piece is to be able to graze, not necessarily to do some big commercial thing. We talk about manure management in this town. Organic farmers clamor to take our manure. If it's a hazard, then I don't know why we're eating organically grown things, because we're poisoning ourselves. And they do a great job of working with us. We provide the great manure, and they provide the great vegetables, and it all works very well. There's a section there that talks about fundraisers. And I'm not sure exactly what's meant by that, because, you can go to a friend's house and have a nice little cocktail reception fundraiser for Nevin's farm, for George Hall's farm, for Simsbury Land Trust. All of a sudden, people that have horses aren't supposed to have a fundraiser. Why? What if we were doing it for George Hall's farm? Or what if we're doing it to rescue horses that are abused and have no homes and need food? Is that wrong? I mean, there's so many points in this document. I went over it and over it and over it. I really don't understand why it is so obsessive. I mean, it's oppressive. And as I said before, I grew up in this town. And as I said before, this town has run very simply, very nicely. It has been a great community where people respect each other, where people work things out. Now all of a sudden we have to bring in the big guns and make all these oppressive changes to the community. I don't see it as necessary. I really don't. My husband and I have worked with Howard Beach on various issues at various times on various pieces of property. It's never been an issue. We go and we talk to him. If there's a problem, he doesn't like what we're doing or it doesn't meet regulation, hey, okay, is there a way to work around this? If we change this, does it work? If it doesn't work, we walk away from it. It's been an easy town to live in. My whole life, I've lived in this town. And I really take offense to the idea that all of a sudden we have to start regulating things to this extreme. So I won't take any more of your time. Thank you. In closing, I would just ask that before you consider making any permanent change or even a moratorium, that you give the horse community people an opportunity to seek our own legal counsel as a group to present equally, because many of us did not know until last minute about this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stacy Savin, Robert Carroll, let's really try to pick this up. It's 9 o'clock now.
All right, here I am. Is this on? I don't know. First of all, I think it's impossible to adapt or adopt any regulations with this much lack of knowledge about it. So I don't see how you can resolve that now. However, I do think that there's a big difference between Folly Farm, which was created, including the housing, at the same time as the farm and is hundreds of acres, and putting in commercial operations in the middle of existing neighborhoods where there are no farms. And I certainly think putting in cows would raise serious problems, and if that's allowed under these regs, then there is a problem, because Simsbury isn't the same as it was 40 years ago. And absolutely people should work things out neighbor to neighbor. Absolutely. But sometimes that just doesn't happen. And this extends beyond these two people. It does affect, I think, the town as a whole. And I think that all parties should be heard from. You guys have a big issue before you, and you probably need time to decide it with input. So I echo the thanks for what you're doing here, and I would ask for the moratorium of some length while people have the opportunity to consider, because making the distinction between 100 acres, 10 acres, 5 acres, who came to the land first, all of these are factors. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and that's what zoning regs do. Thank you very much.
All right, Robert Carroll, Reagan Lansby. Is that right? Regan?
Robert Carroll, 62 West Mountain Road, West Simsbury. I have no problem with horses. It's where you put them. I like horses. I grew up on a farm, not quite as small as the one you guys have here. But if your neighbor doesn't want a horse next to their window, you got to appreciate that. The town obviously approved it. Is that correct? I'm assuming. There was a permit pulled out for horses to be allowed on 5 acres. I have 5 acres. I went for a couple permits, and very difficult to get things passed in this town. Very difficult. I bought the worst house in this town. If you know where it is, pick Karen's house.
You did a lot of work on it.
It was nonstop, and I went through Howard Beach for everything I did. And I'm not here about the horse issue. It's what's allowed on 5 acres. What can you do? When does it become personal or commercial use? And there is no regulation for that. So I think there needs to be something done on that. That's all.
Thank you. Regan Lansby, do I have that right? Huh? Yeah.
So I'd like to echo what everyone has said, but I guess one of my concerns is that the only people that are here opposing the only people that are in support of this are the people that are from the East Weetag district. And what about the rest of us? It just seems like this, again, echoing what everyone has said, that this is really an issue with this a small part of Simsbury, and with and neighbors that are in disagreement. Now, my neighbors, on the other hand, happen to love me having the farm because for several reasons. One, they tell me they don't want anything to change, but more importantly, they know that if the farm isn't there, there's probably going to be some houses put there. And they like the expansion of having the farm and having my pastures and having all the land there that the horses are going to graze on. But the bigger issue is what I think everyone has echoed as far as the distinction between the commercial and the residential. And I think certainly a number of people have addressed that. But I'd also like to address it from my personal approach, is that I'm only one person, and horses take a lot of work, and there's no way as one person that I could possibly do all the work that is required, especially if I have more than one horse, which, as was brought up, horses are pack animals. And that's why we help each other out, or I would have someone renting a stall, because we would share the work, and it makes it work. It makes it work. It makes it so you can have horses, and I think that's a really important point. And with this definition of what's commercial, there's no way I wouldn't be considered commercial if I rent my stall out to one or two other individuals. And furthermore, one of the other things that was brought up is the having trailers on your property. I mean, when are we going to stop? Are you going to make me get rid of my tractor? I mean, that is my love and joy, my tractor, my Kubota. I mean, but is that uglier than a tractor or than a trailer? I don't know. But I think there's just, again, there's just so many restrictions here, and there's so many gray zones, and I just don't see how this could ever be passed, especially after all that everyone else has said.
Thank you. So it's 9 o'clock, and I sense strongly that the town has turned off the air conditioner.
I know, really, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
At 9 o'clock. So I would act respectfully if, is it Calervo Hippa, Allison Patricelli, Charlie Melanson, John Conway, Stephen Mitchell, or Gail Ryan would passionately like to speak, or not.
Maybe the two kids.
I'll speak. Calervo Hippa.
All right.
I'm Allison.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I'm so happy. I'm so happy.
Thank you, Gail. I'll cross you off.
All right, so I'm Calervo Hippa. I am the son of Patty Hippa and the neighbor of Mark Sullivan. I learned how to ride before I could walk. And to start off, I represent something that hasn't really been represented here, like the future of Simsbury. I'm going to be the future homeowner in Simsbury, hopefully, and all that stuff. And a lot of these regulations affect how we can own houses in Simsbury and all these things. And well, as you can see, people come up here and saying they moved to Simsbury because of the current zoning regulations and all that stuff. How you can have a farm with just 5 acres and stuff like that. And that would and if you switch it to 10 acres, that would affect us a lot and make it sound as if the property we're trying to do, that property has become the next Folly Farm. And that'll be quite an accomplishment to do it on just 5 acres, but I don't think that's quite possible. And there's also some other points in here, because I've read this over plenty of times, and there's a point in saying that we can't if on a private place we can't even show our horses or rent them out. That's kind of ridiculous. It's kind of like saying you could buy a book, you could put it on your shelf, but you just can't read it. So I'm done.
Thank you.
I wasn't going to speak tonight because my father did such a great job, and of course it goes without saying I agree with everything he said, but I want to echo a little bit what you said. I'm Allison Patricelli. I live at 79 Hartford Road on Folly Farm, next door to my father and stepmother, Margaret and Bob Patricelli. I recently moved my entire family, husband and 3 young children, from Colorado, where I learned to be a veterinary surgeon because I grew up around horses and learned to love them, back to Simsbury because I wanted my children to experience what it was like to grow up in a town like Simsbury. Part of that experience has to do with having places like Folly Farm, Flaming Farm, Mrs. Ryan's place, Mr. Lavery's place, which is the very first place I ever had a horse, by the way, in this town. But more importantly, what I want you to consider tonight is this is a zoning hearing, pure and simple. All you are being asked to do is consider whether this set of proposed regulations makes sense for our town. That's it, and whether we should have a moratorium. This set of proposed regulations is ridiculous. It is the wrong answer. Whether or not we need to make laws about personal versus commercial entities and horse farms is a separate question. The question tonight is, are these the laws we want? My resounding answer is no. If you can't have private horses that you show, if you can't have private horses that you let a neighbor child help you take care of, if you can't have commercial organizations in an R40 zone, Folly Farm's already in an R40 zone, guys. These are the wrong laws.
Steve Mitchell, Charlie Melanson, and John Conway are the others, if you are still here.
Steve Mitchell, 165 Old Farms. I didn't move here. I was born here. Article 7, Section B, is this is just obvious that this is ill-conceived, ill-advised law. It's horsecraft. Can you imagine everyone in Simsbury with 1 acre having a horse on it? Yeah. And people with 2.5 acres, according to this regulation, would have 3 horses, possibly? That's irresponsible.
All right, we're good. Last chance, last call. All right.
I didn't sign up.
I was pretty strict about signing up beforehand, and you were here. We really have heard a lot of testimonies, so I'm respectfully say no. All right.
Beat the same.
What's that?
You don't want to beat the same horse.
You have a chance to, again, please just wrap up. We're not going to let people rebut what you say now, so I just assume you say what you'd like, but I'm not looking for a point-by-point rebuttal. This is what I'm trying to say. All right.
Again, Brian Smith, representing Mark Sullivan, want to make a few points in summary. First point is that it takes a lot of courage for someone to say, I think the law is wrong, I want to change the law, and put himself out there. Regardless of whether you agree with what he's proposed, he did what everyone says, well, if you really have a problem, why don't you do something about it? He did. He did. That takes courage to face everybody. And if you don't like what he says, you get the opportunity to come and say your piece as well. And so I just want people to understand that he has an issue that is more than just himself. And this is an issue that is something, as you've heard from others, not a lot, but others, and more than just one other person has said, yes, this is something that needs to be addressed. Now, these particular regulations, people have raised a number of points and said, well, we don't like this one, we don't like that one. My suggestion is this, Mr. Chairman, is that we continue the hearing, we, Mr. Sullivan, and we make appropriate revisions to continue the discussion and continue the hearing until, I think the next meeting is, Hiram, what you said, September 16th. And so that we would submit revised regulations to you well before that. Everybody in the room here is going to have a chance, that they all know about it now, and they can get others to come in and take a look at that. And then we can have a continued discussion about this. So that would be my proposal. I'm authorized to ask for the extension. And if the pleasure of the commission is to agree to that, that's what we will do.
Please, we don't need comments from the audience relative to that.
And so that, I mean, I can also summarize tonight, but if the commission decides, yes, let's continue and hold the hearing open, we will make amendments to responsive, we believe, to the issues that have been raised. I think there's also some confusion. Some people, just summary, some people seem to have mixed the idea of what is residential use and commercial and say, well, I'm going to be dead because I can't do this. Commercial farms that are existing are grandfathered in any event, and it's not aimed at them. So we need to make that point clearer, obviously, so that people fully understand it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Smith, and I will thank Mr. Sullivan for making these applications because clearly it's passionate, and I will say that we'll have questions and discussions among ourselves, but it is difficult to craft revisions, and we know this from our own experience that word parsing is difficult as it relates to these regulations. So that's not lost on us. We've addressed zoning changes repeatedly, and the law of unintended consequences sometimes is a result of that. Thank you.
And I thank you for considering everything. I share with everybody the efforts, and even though I'm a lawyer and talk a lot, I do appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so among the commission then, the question really that we need to address is a process question relative to the issue of, in this particular case, horse use on properties in the town of Simsbury. And so, to me, the question is whether we stick with this proposed set of regulations and keep the hearing open, or close the public hearing and try to address these issues on our own.
Well, does it have to be that we close, it seems as though if these are going to be changed, these regulations, worked with, we would close this public hearing because they're going to have another public hearing on a new set.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it seems to me that you wouldn't want to extend this public hearing. I don't know, I'm asking a question. You would close this public hearing on this set of regulations, and then you would go back at it with a new set. Is that how it works?
What the applicants asked for is that they would continue it until September 16th in order to revise this application. So it would essentially be a continuation of the public hearing. If Mr. Chairman's right, is that you need to decide whether this regulation is close enough to what you think is reasonable, or whether you think, in my opinion, frankly, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, is that substantial changes are going to really be a new application. Minor changes, I think, would be considered a new application. So,
well, I think it's also a question of, again, I responding to what Attorney Smith says, that it is, what's the right word? I mean, courageous is the word you used, but I think it shows initiative to propose a full set of regulations and put yourself out there. That's not an easy thing to do. But that's not usually the way we go about doing regulation changes on the zoning commission. They're usually created by staff based on trends or issues that are presented and crafted by town council and vetted by the commission ourselves before we propose a set of regulation changes that we think reflect what we hope reflect the sentiments of the community at large, and then we put those out there for public hearing. And I think that's a much more comfortable way for us to do it. I think here we have the benefit of extensive public information and input from what happened tonight, with thanks to Mr. Sullivan for having put this all in front of us, not necessarily the way we would have thought about doing it. So I think that's the question as to how substantive the changes would be, or whether we look at this set of proposed regulations asked to be voted on And if that's what we really think was the question tonight, then we probably should vote on closing the public hearing and then go to the two questions that are at hand.
I think there's changes that have to be made in the proposed regulations are substantial enough that we should close it, remand it to staff to work on with the attorney, and let them resubmit something sometime in the future when they've reached that point. The people here can't be expected to come to every meeting, hearing to hearing to hearing, and the theory that someday it might be closed and voted on when they're not here.
I'm more comfortable with that approach myself, because I think that this seems to be that there's a lot of people who have a lot invested and feel as though this was thrown out quickly without a lot of benefit of looking at it for a long period of time. And frankly, there are good ideas here, I think. We need to make sure they work. We need to make sure they're given due process so people can weigh in. Because frankly, I think you have common ground, but it's not going to be reached like this. And I'm concerned about what you're saying, which is, if you keep it open and then people have to keep an eye on the ball, but if you notice it, you do it correctly, there's nothing wrong with proposing changes, but I think this sort of snuck up on people, and there's obviously a lot of really deep feeling here in many different areas. I don't think it's I don't think it's a done deal that you don't do this. I just think we need to make sure the process is one where everybody gets a fair chance. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I would go further to say that this was proffered by the applicant,
right,
and that there seems to be a sense of community here with an opposing view that might have, with collaborative effort, be able to provide a different point of view on the same questions, all while we try to craft a revision or leave it just as it is, but that would be driven by input that's already been given by Mr. Sullivan and his team, and that might come from those others that spoke, opposed to these regulation changes, and see if we can't do that in real time.
I just want to be clear, your suggestion is that the hearing be closed and that there should be some sort of work on another regulation between staff and the applicant.
I think we should. My suggestion is we close the public hearing.
But the only thing I'm saying is that if you're considering, either way, if you're considering adopting a regulation which is this one that's been proposed or something very similar, then that's fine. If it's going to be a whole new regulation and the commission's going to ask staff to work with anybody, not only the applicant but other folks, then you need to take an action on that regulation so that the new regulation comes in.
I propose I would take an action on this.
We understand that.
Yeah.
I think we understand that too. All right, so I'm looking
to close the public hearing.
for a second.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. So now the commission can act or consider each of the two applications since the public hearings have been closed. So the first is to discuss and take action on the moratorium. And, my view is that moratorium is designed to maintain the status quo, but the status quo exists with or without the moratorium. We have revised zoning regulations many times in the past without having to call a moratorium while we considered those changes, all of which are in the public domain. If it's really designed to create a sense of urgency, well, that's what we do. Having said that, we don't have meetings in August. I just want to be on record as saying we have a sense of urgency except for the month of August.
We have to move the application and vote on it.
Right. So we have, yes, so there is an application, so if someone wants, among the commission, wants to move that we adopt the moratorium as requested, someone would need to move that.
I'll move the question.
Move the question?
I'll move it to, that we accept the moratorium.
All right.
Second.
You'll second it. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Wait, I just want to be clear. You're saying that to accept it would be then to put it in place?
Right.
Okay.
So there are no votes for the moratorium, and there are all those opposed to the moratorium, just to be crystal clear.
All right.
So the moratorium is not passed. All right. The second question before the commission tonight is whether we should or should not adopt this set of regulations as presented.
I feel for the process issues that we've already discussed. We've got a tremendous amount of information here. We're being educated right now as we sit here. We've had some great ideas both ways, but it's not something, I think we should take action on what's before us right now and reconsider a new process for the future, probably led by staff. And by the way, I don't see that as a process that can happen in 30 days or 60 days.
Right.
I agree with
Hiram's got some spirit.
But probably within 6 months or December 17th, whichever happens first. No, we don't mean to be flipped. This is serious business. So again, in order for us to consider, someone
Need a
has...
motion.
We need a motion.
Well, I would move that we deny the applicant.
No, you have to move that you...
I move that we,
Consider, you move...
that we
That
agree
doesn't
to
sound,
the,
that
agree to the
doesn't
new
sound
rule.
right to me, but...
Yeah, you can't make a negative motion.
All right. All right, so move it.
I move that we approve the regulations as submitted.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor of approving the regulations as submitted, say aye. All those opposed, say
Nay.
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 So it's unanimous.
Yes.
These are emotional topics. They deal with people's lives, passions, property, income, the character of our town. We take all of these things extremely seriously. We're overwhelmed by the participation tonight, and it's very rewarding to us. We take very seriously our commitment to you to come up with some regulations, or at least to address these issues that were raised by Mr. Sullivan and others that relate to the use of your own property and the like in town, consistent with the character of our town. So thank you very, very much for coming.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Susan, I just want to introduce myself. I'm the person who spoke to us about Are you
Hiram, that's my daughter. I think she thought it was going to be a shorter meeting. I may have misled her. It's always a jinx at home. I said to my wife, it's probably going to be a quick one. Yes.
I didn't like them dissing your cows. I didn't like them dissing your cows.
Done.
Mark's a friend of mine, Reading, some of those regs, Reading is a train wreck.
Well, I was looking.
Yeah, some of that stuff doesn't work.
That's why I asked.
I'll talk to her because I would love to be engaged in this. I'm personally kind of from Arrow Center. We're very concerned when it comes to the way that things are.
Yeah.
And one of the things in particular that's very serious sense of how this is going is special exception for
Right.
special exceptions are for giving events. You know,
Right.
you have all that.
I couldn't agree more with that. I didn't like that.
Problematic.
Yeah.
There's a set of rules and it's not about special exceptions.
Right. That's right. You're right. I think we're still meeting.
Yeah, we're still in session.
Sorry.
Yes. Thank you all for coming. We still have additional business, so. All right.
It's all on tape, just in case you wanted.
Thanks, guys. I know.
Let me shut the doors.
Yeah, if you would, I guess. I mean, you don't have to leave, but we do have to finish our regular business, so, all right.
Thank you.
As scintillating as the rest of this will be. Somebody dropped a pen there.
A nice pen.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to take
Oh,
it.
man.
I did.
Mont
I had
Blanc?
my eye on that pen.
He was going to give it to you
I
if he
know.
got his way.
I was like, ooh, you left the pen.
I turned the AC back on.
Yeah, they did. They were driving us out.
Oh.
Here's our liaison
Okay,
person.
we're still.
Controversy's over, the selectmen can come in.
Hiram, we're still
My
meeting.
attention span is done.
I got to get home.
People are waiting.
What else we got? This is an all-time long record.
2 minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, good.
Village District project is for basically the northern Weetog Village District area. The next meeting, then probably the final public meeting, is going to be on August 8th. It's going to be at 6 p.m. at the library. You can possibly make that. We're going to start talking about regulatory views. The first meeting was on vision. The second meeting was on design. Third meeting will be on the regulation. And then ultimately, when we finish that up, we'll get that to you for consideration probably sometime in the fall if other regulations don't take precedent. But the second thing is the marketing project. The marketing consultant is working hard, talking to various businesses in town, has made appointments to talk with several of them. This week he's on vacation, but as soon as he gets back, I've asked him for an update in terms of exactly where he is and when he'll finish that up. I hope to finish that up in August as well. So by September, I'll have this commission, all the other land use commissions, and EDC up to date on what we're doing with that project. Perhaps the third and the most significant project in terms of time and perhaps public interest is the Hartford Land Use Study. We interviewed the 3 consultants last week and a half ago, and we're down to the final 3. We're very close to making a final decision. The presentations were all extremely good. It's very close in terms of which consultant gets picked. As soon as this first selectman gets back tomorrow, I expect to have a decision. I've given her the ranking sheets, and we expect to make that decision within the next 24 hours and then have that consultant on board hopefully very, very shortly.
How long are they going to be doing the work, the consultant?
We need to have a major benchmark done by the end of September, according to the Hartford.
So quickly then?
It's going to be quickly, yeah. And August is going to be flat out in terms of staff doing stuff to get ready for the charrette and that type of work. We need to have something done, either a significant design session or actually run the charrette itself by the end of September. So it's going to be really flat out. We don't want to do it before September because folks are still away.
Oh, no, right.
But we definitely want to have that major design session and then have that done by the end of September. So we'll have kind of a framework for the design for that property, that 172 acres, by the end of September. No matter how this goes with regard to the consultants, all very good, very interesting process. I hope people participate in it. It's going to be very interesting. It's really kind of a neat thing with the public-private partnership that we've kind of worked up with this. The consultants all realize that. There'll be a lot of people having input into that process. And if it works, it will be fantastic. So looking forward to it.
Good news.
Great.
That's it.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Oh, jeez.
My poor daughter.
She'll never come
I don't know,
again.
it